enforcement side. He can't just willy-nilly get rid of the laws. So restoring that, I think, has got to be the first priority of Congress. It's the thing we need to do first to get our government, our Constitution back to where it needs to be. Thank you. Shocking.
He's got a pen and a telephone. Next is Stephen Hollingson.
Well, I need to admit something I have in common with President Obama. Both of us used to teach the Constitution of the United States. But the difference is I read it first. Get through that beautiful preamble and get right to Article 1, Section 1. All legislative power herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. Doesn't say a word about a phone or a pen or not waiting for Congress. Members of the House have standing to sue and need to do so when the President takes away their constitutional powers under the Constitution. I mean, it's right there, right? That Congress makes the law. When the President uses his phone and his pen and makes the law, he needs to be sued in court. We need to pass legislation that overrides his executive orders, like the one that says the Homeland Security needs to keep track of where your car is.
Howie Lynn.
I talk about this race a lot, and this is a great segue into what really is at play in this race now. We are missing one here, of course, but this isn't a popularity contest. This is serious, deadly business that we're talking about and what our Congress and our White House are doing. It's deadly business. Obamacare. If we don't take a stand and stop Obamacare, death panels will be in place, Americans will die. If we don't take a stand against the massive defense cuts in the military, our military, when called into action, will be outgunned, Americans will die. If we don't take a stand for securing the southern border, we'll continue to have lawlessness down there and Americans will die. Impeachment. I get that question all the time. We get the question about this president and others all the time. It's lawlessness. This White House has been engaging in lawlessness for all this time. The question from Chris about stripping away Obamacare, that's just the latest example. NSA, there is a lawsuit, Stephen mentioned. It's called the NSA, Senator Rand Paul, with Ken Cuccinelli's help, they are suing the federal government over the NSA spying right now.
Doug and Bob Marty.
This past summer, I reread Elliott's debates. What's that? That's the record of all the debates in the states where the Constitution was being ratified. Rhode Island wasn't in there because they never attended the convention. When you go back and look at the real powers that we're supposed to have, they don't have some of these powers. I talked to Eric Cantor for about 20 minutes, telling him, you have the power to completely cut the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court in these problem areas of sex and marriage. He never heard of it. I had to point out the big book in his office to do that. I talked to his staff for 20 minutes, telling his staff, the only people that can sue on Obamacare now are the members of the House of Representatives, because all revenue bills must start in the House. The tax started in the Senate on a tax credit bill. It is not constitutional. He needs to go back and read the Constitution and obey it. You have got to have people who are grounded in this, who are willing to get in fights, and don't care who you're fighting, including your own leadership.
I just love playing cleanup. John Boehner does have standing to stop the President of the United States. The only recourse here is through our courts. And if the members of the House of Representatives won't do it, then as American citizens, we need to contact our congressmen and tell them that they need to get Mr. Boehner to do this. If not, that they will be removed from office. We need to contact Mr. Boehner ourselves and tell them that. We need a new American revolution in this country because we are losing. You can clap, that's fine. This country, I'm 59 years old, this country is not what it was when I was younger, and it's not going to be what it should be when my 5 grandchildren reach age. We need to stop this president, this administration right now. You know, Barack Obama thinks that the three branches of government are the executive branch, Eric Holder, and the congressional country. And as I said, we have to take our own initiative and go after this by contacting the Speaker of the House. Thank you.
You know, there is Stephen Hollingshead mentioned teaching the Constitution like Barack Obama, but first reading it unlike Barack Obama. There is a photograph that's actually from Barack Obama's own campaign website from 2007, showing him in front of a blackboard at the University of Illinois, Chicago, teaching the Constitution. But if you look at the chalkboard, this is on his own website, he's diagramming rules for radicals in what is supposed to be a constitutional law class.
Well, he's just teaching people how to subvert the Constitution.
Well, right. Now, there are different ways to teach the Constitution.
I think he did that in Bill Ayers' living room, actually.
Well, that's how he launched his political career that day, a little coffee with the terrorists. And this question, we begin with Stephen Hollingshead. And the question is a pretty straightforward one. What differentiates you from the other candidates vying for the Republican nomination?
That's a good question, Chris. I'm the only candidate in this race with broad business experience. My dad started a machine shop, and he and Mom built a company that sells products all over the world. Like my dad, I'm an entrepreneur. I've been in manufacturing, food distribution, management consulting. I'm on the board of a financial services firm that does business in more than 3,000 communities across the United States. So that's one thing. The other, I mentioned before, I'm the only person who's ever gone and reformed any government. President Bush made me Deputy Assistant Secretary for Enforcement, Senior Advisor to 3 HUD Secretary. I ran the President's management agenda for HUD, and we found and we stopped $2 billion a year in welfare fraud that was going on in HUD. And the third thing I've mentioned a couple of times is that I used to teach the Constitution of the United States for my day job. And this is the guidebook that we need. Not even the big book in it's almost Eric Holder, but Eric Hanner's office. But this little book, what Bob was mentioning is in Article 3, Section 2 of this little book. This is what we need. And this is, so I think those three things distinguish me. Thanks.
I feel my background and experiences from my professional life uniquely qualify me for this office for the times we live in right now. I was honored to have served as a naval officer for 20 years, leading young men and women around the world on difficult and demanding missions. Later, serving as your 10th Congressional District Chairman and your representative on the Republican State Central Committee. I've been fighting for conservatism across Virginia for many, many years. Not the establishment, not the Washington, D.C., which our candidate at the end, who's not here, will take to Washington to be part of the establishment. So I ask you, and back to the final point here, I've stood up, I'm standing up within our party to leadership in Washington to say, buck up, get a backbone, and stop Obama from destroying our country. That's the key, and that's why I think, for me, for this race now, I'm qualified, and I ask for your vote again on April 26th to be the non-establishment conservative who can win the nomination and win in November. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to think it's my humility and charm, but I won't press that point. I'm the only person in Northern Virginia who was a state official who sued Governor Tim Kaine, Speaker Republican Bill Howell, Republican Attorney General Bob McDonnell, raised $100,000, challenged them in court because they set up a law that allowed unelected people to tax you up here and in Tidewater. They thought I was Don Quixote. They didn't think I was Don Quixote after I won 7-0. The Speaker of the House. I thought I was something else I won't tell you, but the Speaker of the House wanted me to change the rules to provide for secret votes in subcommittees. I refused. He stripped me of 16 years in seniority. He took me off the vice chairmanship of one committee and 2 chairmanships of other committees. I'd say I'll do it again in Washington. Number 1, 3, I have been tested. I've never voted for a tax increase. I had my house picketed by gay rights people. I'm not buckling on any of these moral issues, period.
We need somebody in Washington who's going to stand up not only to the President of the United States, but as someone else said, to our own party. We need somebody who is going to, well, let me tell you what I've been doing. I have been doing just this for the past 15 years. Besides being a Main Street business owner, I have been the president, as I mentioned before, of a national association that protects small business. I don't get paid for that. And also consumers. I have gone up against the likes of Barney Frank, Chris Dodd, Maxine Waters, Chuck Schumer, all the folks up here that are talking about this is what they'll do when they get to Washington. I have been doing this in Washington. I bring a unique experience from the private sector, and not from government, but from the Washington sector. Somebody who's been in there defending you for 15 years. I don't have to practice what I would do as a congressman. I've already been doing a similar job all this time. Thank you.
Rob Walsinger.
Again, I have a long history of fighting for conservative causes against the establishment, against the Democrats. It really doesn't matter. During my time with Sam Brownback, we decided to challenge the Bush administration, and they needed to be challenged a lot, on the nomination of Harriet Miers to the Supreme Court. She would have been an absolute disaster, another David Souter in the making, and in return for that, we got Samuel Alito. And I just finished up a stint on Capitol Hill with Congressman Kerry Bentivolio. And when Paul Ryan and Patty Murray got together and decided to sell us out on the budget and get rid of sequestration, increase spending, our money, we stood up against it and voted no. We've got to vote no on these debt ceilings when they come up. At the beginning of the Bush administration, it's 55%. Now it's over 100%. The most important thing is we need to have somebody with the courage to fight against the administration, fight against the Democrats, the Republicans, and do the right thing, regardless of the consequences. And I'm that person. I'd love your vote on the 26th. Thank you.
All right, this one begins with Howie Lind. This question is, do you support or oppose, and it kind of came up a little bit in passing earlier, do you support or oppose the continued efforts through the Department of Education to nationalize the American educational system, most recently through the Common Core State Standards Initiative? If so, either way, will you vote to cut off federal funding for national curriculum testing and the trade organizations that promote these initiatives, including federal efforts to collect cradle-to-grave data on American children?
Yes.
Delegate Bob Marshall. Just kidding.
Yeah, long question. I mean, yes to all that. I mean, Common Core is so bad. Raise your hand if you've heard of Common Core. All right, that's great. A lot of people in this country, they don't know what it is, but you all know. We know. It's terrible. It's being pushed by this huge bureaucracy in Washington, the Department of Education, to go out to every schoolhouse in America and dictate what to do. It truly is Obamacare for education. It should be done away with. Yes, indeed, I'll vote against that. As far as the unions, yes, indeed, I'll vote to whatever you said. But you know, back to the personal aspect of this, I have 4 grown daughters. 3 of them are in education. I mean, it's not. This is not. We're not an education. We're not an anti-education party. I'm not anti-education. It's to the states. The federal government should stay out of it. Leave it to the states and local towns and cities. Thank you.
Delegate Bob Marshall.
Parents are the first educators. Any authority of anybody to educate, no matter who it is, in a private school or a public school in the state, receives that authority, that delegation from the parents. No one else. It's not a bureaucracy. It is your responsibility. It is you who are accountable. You really shouldn't be doing this. This is not training for critical faculties of thinking. It is propaganda for a worldview that is alien to the fundamental presuppositions of the United States Constitution. Washington meddling in these areas, you wouldn't have to worry about this. You got to. Let me tell you what I did one time when Roe versus Wade. When the Hyde Amendment was being challenged. I went downstairs to draw up an amendment to tell the clerk we're cutting off all the funding for all the clerks of the Supreme Court justices except one because they're meddling too much. He says, "Is your boss serious?" I said, "You better believe he's serious. We're going to do it. We're going to work for you and cut out these people because the power of the purse is the most volatile, effective power we have in Washington."
me start by saying yes to everything and then elaborate. This is an easy question. The problem with our education system in this country is called Washington, D.C. As I said before, the Department of Education needs to go. Standards of learning tests. My daughter's a teacher, and I hear this from her and a lot of other teachers all over the district. Teachers today do not teach the subject matter. They teach how to pass the test. And that is the problem. And this is destroying the future of this country. Our teachers are training the next generation. We're not giving them the right tools how to do it. If we don't change this thing and change it quickly, we're going to be in a worse position than we are today. So that's going to be a top priority when I get to Congress. Thank you.
Thank you. I absolutely oppose Common Core. I oppose No Child Left Behind. And like I think most people up here agree, the Department of Education should be eliminated. Our children some are in school, some are homeschooled. And it's very true that parents are the first educators of children, and that's such a vital, fundamental right of parents that we need to have restored. And it's getting trampled on by our federal government, in some cases by our state government. So getting all of those decisions down to the lowest possible unit of government is what we need to do to ultimately solve these problems and protect the rights of parents to homeschool. There's a real assault on homeschool.
Stephen Hollington.
Well, as an educational entrepreneur, I have worked with students of all ages. I think I might have mentioned I also taught the Constitution at the university level. So education is very, very important in my home. And we homeschool our children because the parents, Bob is right, that parents are the first educators of their children. And even when you run a school, as I once did, the parents are in charge, and you have some technical expertise, one hopes, that you can lend to the enterprise. But the best thing we can do for education is to get rid of the Department of Education, not because there aren't some wonderful people working there. I've never met any, but I'm sure there are. but we need to give them a way to transition out, and get back to the local level, because the closer education is to parents, the better it is for children.
Of course, in your family, when you're homeschooling, you're actually running a school.
Well, yeah. And a hotel, and a restaurant. My wife is the COO.
You must be. And this one we start with Bob Marshall. The question comes from Margaret in Winchester, who asks, Obamacare is now showing itself for the destructive force that it really is in this country. Do you believe it can be fixed, in quotation marks, with amendments and changes and so on, or do you believe that it should be voted out of existence and reasonable legislation, such as tort reform, should be used to replace?
Well, we fixed dogs, but I don't know. There have been 40 votes to rescind Obamacare, but none that are really serious in at least pulling some of these things out piece by piece. There's a parable in the New Testament. Once the weeds and the wheat grow, it gets harder and harder to pull this out. You got to have an alternative. I put an alternative in this year, which the incoming president of the Medical Society of Virginia found very appealing. What I said was, if a doctor gives community service and takes care of indigent patients, the Attorney General will defend that doctor in a lawsuit. This would push medicine back to where it was in the early 1950s, where the Hippocratic Oath prevailed, and the cure, not the destruction of individuals or the erection or establishment of agencies, was the goal. We have to do this. I have fought Medicaid expansion. I'm not for it, even if you reform it like my opponent is. We need to get back to non-governmental answers.
You talk about fixing Obamacare. I think the fix was in when they passed this thing. This was only passed by the Democrats. Obamacare needs to go. You can't repair something that's a disaster. Okay, you have to knock it down, you have to destroy it and rebuild. And what we need to do is have our health care replaced by the free market society. You know, before Obamacare, we had individual insurance. You couldn't go outside your state. So competition was limited. If you open up the borders, and they can do that, they're Congress. Open up the borders where you have competition all across the country. You're going to have reduced prices. People can pick what type of insurance, a la carte, so to speak, they want, which can keep the prices down, keep their deductibles down, because this is nothing but a disaster on this country, not just for health care, but also for jobs, because your employers are going to be knocking down the hours from 40 hours, maybe some overtime each week, to 29 hours a week, and when they do that, people aren't going to be able to pay for their mortgage, their car payments. We're going to have a worse economic crisis than we had before. Thank you.
Obamacare simply cannot be fixed. It's got to be yanked up by the roots. It's got to be repealed. You know, out there on the road, this is the thing we hear the most. It's crushing small businesses. And when they announced that they had 7 million signups on healthcare.gov, it's not that we've got 7 million people that were uninsured that now have it. No, they displaced 7 million people that were already insured. So they're fixing a problem they're creating. It's got to be repealed, absolutely. And then we need to do things like tort reform. Maybe give medical savings accounts a better try. Something to connect the decision to seek health care with the costs associated with it. And I'd like to end by just pointing out one thing. Barbara Comstock, who is not here today, as we all know, voted to include elective abortions in the healthcare exchanges mandated under Obamacare in the state of Virginia. And that is something that we don't need in this race. Thank you.
You're a Hill guy, you've got legislative background, you know how these things work. What would it take to actually repeal the bill? I mean, as long as President Obama's in the White House, he can veto any bill that gets out of the House and the Senate. And if it's vetoed, it's sent back to the Hill. You'd have to have a veto-proof majority in both houses to actually repeal the legislation itself, right?
Right. Well, there is time. We have to win elections. I mean, that's honestly what we need to do. And we need to send people to Washington that are conservative and aren't going to go into the general election apologizing for being conservative and then flip when they get there. Repealing this means winning elections, and this year we're in a perfect position to do that. In the House, we can take back the Senate, and then we got to take back the White House. But the time to fight is now.
But what you're saying is that you've got to have the House, the Senate, and the White House to actually repeal it, to repeal it
absolutely.
as a piece of legislation. And I don't want to turn into anarchy here, but Mark was raising his hand. I wanted to follow up a little bit to it.
Right. The Supreme Court had a missed opportunity here. They said that if you didn't have taxes, if you didn't pay for insurance, if you didn't have insurance, you had to pay a penalty. The Supreme Court classified this as a tax. So therefore, they felt as though they had the authority to rule on that. This bill, the Obamacare bill, the Affordable Care Act, originated in the Senate of the United States. Anything that's a tax has to originate in the House of Representatives. So if it didn't do that, they should have thrown it out just for that right there.
Should have, certainly. And someone else who might have something to say about this, I believe, used to teach the Constitution. Am I right about that? And there might be something in there in the Constitution that would pertain to this particular circumstance. Stephen Hollingson.
There might, in fact. Can I go back and answer the original question first?
Please.
I appreciate it. It's been really fun to watch the answers get better and better on this issue as the campaign goes by. Yes, we need to repeal Obamacare when we can, and there are two things we can do to replace it with private sector solutions. One is the Interstate Commerce Clause in the Constitution actually was intended to break down trade barriers between the states. And so we can just pass a law. If you can sell it in Tulsa, you can sell it in Winchester. Second thing we can do is lawsuit reform, stop lawsuit abuse. Defensive medicine, because doctors assign a bunch of tests they know full well you don't need, but they're preparing for their lawyers to be sued. That costs $58 billion a year to Medicare alone. So we can do those things to replace them. In the meantime, however, we know that Obama is going to veto any repeal of a bill with his name on it. And so we can defund it. We can defund parts of the IRS the legislation.
I'm sorry, you said $58 billion a year?
$58 billion a year it costs. Medicare itself estimates that defensive medicine, that doctors are out assigning tests that they know aren't necessary, but that they know that they're only necessary to support their case in a court in the future. And so that raises, of course, the cost when you go to the doctor. And the huge cost of these lawsuits is, it's enormous. Michigan, many years ago, did an interesting reform with regard to auto insurance where they said, hey, there's no fault. People aren't trying to kill each other out there. So if you run into anybody, we're going to take care of the property damage, and you could put a limit on, even if some punitive damage, some small multiple of that, but no multi-million dollar case. And this brought down the cost of insurance substantially. If we did the same thing and said, look, these doctors aren't trying to kill you, and if they do something wrong, they have to pay actual damages, loss of work, whatever, but they're not trying to kill you, so no $17 million lawsuits and so forth. That would bring down the cost of health insurance for everybody.
And of course, the Democrats would be inclined to fight that hammer and sickle, as they say, because the trial lawyers funnel their money almost exclusively to the Democrats. Bob, you want to jump in?
Well, since we're doing this, I was the one who...
Anarchy, see? This was also
You did. I wrote the law that Ken Cuccinelli used to sue Barack Obama, so I was against it. Number two, the suggestion that I have for the Attorney General backing up the lawsuits is what will reduce this defensive medicine. Look, doctors order extra tests, order consultations, not because they're medically necessary, only because they're fearful of a trial attorney. This is a backdoor way around the opposition of the trial attorneys. They're really going to have a hard case to say, are you against the doctor giving free care? You've got to put these people on the defensive instead of saying, well, you won't get the money. This is a way around that. It's a little jujitsu that we can avoid the trial lawyers. We need to use our smarts and not just force.
All right, well, this is how he lived.
Okay, all right. I've been saying this the whole campaign. Obamacare needs to be ripped out by its roots, the whole thing. Now, we have people across the board that say, well, how do you do that? Just like you asked Chris, how about reforming it, or, how do you repeal it? We are Americans. We know health care better than anyone in the world. Why would we ever put up with this unconstitutional abuse in our lives? All right, what to do afterwards? Dr. Ben Carson has great ideas on medical savings accounts. I subscribe to that. Obamacare is coming to Virginia right now. It's called the Government Call-Off Obamacare Medicaid Expansion. And the one who's absent, yes, it was on our website for 1 year, and that's what I called around on this week of the radio ad, and I got, actually, it's an open letter on the internet, you may have seen it, from Speaker Bill Howell, trashing me, calling me a liar with 6 other delegates who you all know out there, and saying how terrible a person I am for doing this. No, it was on her website, they pulled it off that next day, and I voted against it before, I'm for it, and all that stuff. That's what's going on in this case. Thank you.
Well, is there a replacement? Is there...
We've talked about the replacement of free market reforms. Lots of areas can be done to reinvigorate our health care.
And in terms of slapping it down between now and the end of President Obama's term, 2 years that one of you will be in the House of Representatives.
That's exactly that's the other thing. I will, as your congressman, I will fight, obstruct, delay, defund, and repeal Obamacare. There's things that can be done to stop it and slow it down before we get a Republican president there to truly rip it out.
Is it killable at this point, or is this just...
provoking, right?
I know I am. Well, everybody's getting a little bit of extra time on this one, I think. But is it really? Is it killable?
If you listen to Barack Obama, no, you can't do that. No, yes, it can be done. We can take this law out. Yes.
He's actually trying to kill it himself a little bit here.
Well, yeah. It's sort of.
So that should hold us over until he's gone.
Remember when the president said that people would die? People would die if the employer mandate was extended when Republicans wanted to do it? He did it with his phone in his pen. Has anybody died?
Yeah, and remember, it's not a death panel, it's a death board.
He needs to hang up his phone and take his pen and put it in his drawer.
It's the Independent Payment Advisory Board that will decide when grandma will die. So technically, they're telling the truth. I think the Washington Post wouldn't give any Pinocchios for that at all, because it's not a death panel, it's a death board. Important semantic differentiation. This question comes from Chad, Michael, and Jim. They ganged up and got together for this one. Want to know if, we start this time, I know, with you, Reverend. Oh no, I'm sorry, with Bob. This time we start with Bob. I'll get it straight. Chad, Michael, and Jim want to know if you support Speaker John Boehner as the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and if not, then exactly who would you support as Speaker of the House of Representatives?
So this is from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Well, I probably don't have enough seniority to nominate myself.
What humble man that you are.
Yes. I have been, when I first announced that I was doing this, after we found we had enough people to make phone calls all around the district, the first thing I did was to say, Mr. Boehner has not taken the fight to Obama. He is ducking the fight. So I doubt that he would want me to be on any committees that would have any, thing to do. But no, I would not. I don't know why I would support it, because first of all, he probably won't want me there. So I don't know who I would support, but Mr. Boehner would be last on the list.
You don't know who you support?
I haven't talked to any. My wife and I went to a meeting at the Republican Club. There was a gentleman from South Carolina who I thought was very interesting to support. Nice hair.
Good hair is important in politics.
Yes, Congressman Gowdy, right, yeah.
Mark Sapp.
John Boehner's been there a lot longer than he should have already. He needs to go. He has let down not only his party, he has let down this country. The longer he's there, the worse it's going to be for all of us. So that should be the first order of business when the new Congress is convened. As far as who would replace him, Eric Cantor is not the person. I think that's a given. That was a rhetorical question, by the way. Trey Gowdy is, if you've watched him, he used to be a prosecutor. This man is not afraid of anything. He's taken on Lois, the liar learner. And I think he would be my choice.
Rob Washington.
Thank you. It's a good question. I think it gets down to exactly what the decisions are that we're going to be making when we go vote on April 26th. We can stand with the establishment, or we can break with the establishment, join the conservative revolution. We've got great people all across the country. Rand Paul protecting our privacy, fighting the NSA. We've got Scott Walker taking on the unions who are bilking us out of all these tax dollars. We got Tom Coburn that's doing a great job. I think in the House, I definitely would not support Speaker Boehner. I think we've got a lot of great options out there. Trey Gowdy certainly one. I also like Congressman Mark Meadows from North Carolina. He's done a great job. I wouldn't even mind a rabble-rouser like Justin Amash. We need to get out there and join the revolution, and shaking it up a little bit in the House would be a good place to start.
And I don't think it was one of the staffers. Stephen Hollingshead.
I think it's clear that we need some fresh leadership in the House. We're in this conversation, and you just listen to the magical thinking that goes on down there. Paul Ryan introduces a budget, everybody attacks him for these huge cuts. That's lowering the rate of growth. Under the Ryan budget that's so horrible, well gosh, 3.5% growth per year over the next 10 years. That's faster than the private sector is growing. Those aren't cuts at all. So I do think we need fresh leadership. There are some good rabble-rousers. All their names have been mentioned, although I think it's a great innovation to vote for people based on their hair. Mr. Gowdy, Hey, it works, that's right. Again, I'm not sure. We'd have to have that conversation and see what people will commit to do. And maybe we can have a test and see if they've read this book.
Gonna hand some out.
I do that. Everybody who gives money to my campaign, I do send a little copy of this Constitution, so just bear that in mind.
How we live?
Absolutely, John Boehner has to depart as Speaker of the House. There's many people that can lead in that job. I've always said throughout this campaign, leadership, either military or business or politics, if you're not leading, get out of the way and let someone else be the leader. There's just a few names that we've already mentioned, Louis Gohmert and Trey Gowdy, two good friends of mine, Joe Wilson, Steve King, both strong conservatives. Many people can lead. But let me go back to this name that we keep saying over and over again, John Boehner. I've been saying that name every night for the last 2 months, every time we're out anywhere, because of Benghazi. Our Congressman Frank Wolf has been leading this Congress in getting a special investigative committee on Benghazi. He has 100 John Boehner, and who knows why? I keep asking Frank, why? He doesn't know. All right, that's. I signed a letter recently with 100 and some other retired senior military officers to John Boehner, demanding that a special investigative committee be set up for Benghazi. Still hasn't happened. Thank you.
All right, and the next one goes to Mark 7. And I'm kind of, this is actually not on the list, but something I want to ask you. If you're elected to the United States Congress, what cause, what effort do you want to be known for?
I want to be known for standing up for my constituents, for representing my constituents, not representing special interests like we have too many of those in Congress now. I want to be known for somebody who voluntarily put a contract together with the constituents in his district to term limit himself, number one. In that contract, I will retain my own health insurance policy and pay for it out of my own pocket because all of you do that. I want to be known as somebody that will not take special interest money, so there's no doubt who I actually represent, and that's the true meaning of the word representative.
Rob Wassinger.
Thanks. Every day when you go to Washington, D.C., there's always somebody giving you an excuse for why we shouldn't go fight. People on the House side, if you listen to House leadership, they say, well, we can't really fight right now because the Democrats have the Senate, so we need to compromise here. And let's say we win the Senate this year. You know what they're going to say? They're going to say, well, we've got the House and the Senate, but we don't have the White House, so we need to compromise. It's the first thing out of their mouth every single time there's an important issue up. And the time to fight is now. It's not when we have all three. The time to fight is right now. And an example of that is, at the beginning of the Bush administration, I mentioned this earlier, the debt ceiling stood at 55% of our GDP, and now is over 100%. Are you kidding me? If now is not the time to fight, I don't know when it is. So that's what I'm going to do, is go there and fight to get our spending under control and fight right now. Not when we have the Senate, not when we have the White House, but right now. We've got to start fighting.
Brawler, you want to be known as a brawler.
That's right, I'm a brawler.
Stephen Hollington.
Well, I don't want to just be known as the guy who keeps upholding the Constitution. You know, the thing that really makes my blood boil is cronyism in all its forms. You know, the government cannot, this is the guy I want to be known as, the guy who says this over and over again. The government cannot give anything to anyone without first taking it from someone else. Let me give you an example from right here in Virginia. A couple of my opponents, one of them who's not here tonight, Mrs. Comstock, has introduced, and she brags about it on her website. You can go to her website to get the bill number. Green energy tax credits in 2010. The same year, a wind farm authority, so that folks could go get those energy loans from the Department of Energy that Solyndra made famous, and Delegate Marshall voted for both bills. And she's passed a whole bunch of other special loopholes, exclusions, and exceptions for campaign donors and other folks. And that's why Virginia's tax on business is 46% above the national average, because you create a new constituency against tax reform, against the Reagan way of broadening the base and lowering the rate every time you do one of those special favors for special people. So I'm going to be the guy who stands up for the little guy, the people who can't afford to hire a lobbyist Comstock, that's her day job, and, to fight for them. My dad started with a machine shop, and no lobbyist ever represented a machine shop anywhere.
Are we winning?
There's a lot to do in Congress, as we've been talking about for the last hour and 15 minutes or so. The massive spending in debt, we are mired in debt, we could be in financial collapse now. But what I want to be known for in Congress, restoring the morale of the military. No one even talks about that. Here's what's going on in the United States military right now. If you're a general or an admiral, or even a colonel or a Navy captain, and if you disagree with anything, it doesn't have to be politics, you disagree with anything that's coming down from on high, you're out, you're shown the door. But on the way to the door, you're told, and if you talk about this to anybody, you'll lose your security clearance. That means they can't work. They've spent their career, 30, 40 years in the military, and what are they going to do? They're going to work as a defense consultant or something on the outside. It's terrible. It's Hitlerism. It's socialism. That makes my blood boil to even talk about that. And I'll get into one other topic in the last 10 seconds. This happened during the attack at Benghazi. And the general and admiral said, no, we're protecting Americans. We're sending forces in. They were both fired on the spot. Thank you.
And the last word on this one goes to Delegate Bob Marshall.
If I get there, I would like to be known for leading the effort to return to the founders' vision. Every time I think of what to do, I ask myself, how does this affect my neighbor? Is it constitutional? Is it consistent with our fundamental principles? That's why I introduced the bill this year and got it passed, which says that none of you will be tracked in your cell phones or your computers unless there is a warrant issued, and it is directly relating to you, not these mass searches that the NSA is doing. I do not want military transfers to go to our enemies to give aid and comfort with technology. When you're in Richmond, you often have not the perfect in front of you, but the practical. Now, while I would vote for a fair tax or any other tax that it applies equally across the board, if the only tax cut you have there is a tax credit, I'll vote for it because that's the only thing you have. I opposed a $145 million subsidy to a bunch of Hollywood Democrats led by Michael Eisner, who wanted you to build his interchange for $145 million. He made $205 million that year. He could have had change. Kings Dominion built their own interchange. Busch Gardens built it. You shouldn't subsidize corporations. You're the boss, not them.
Stephen, what did you think?
With all due respect, Bob, Ronald Reagan disagrees with you. You don't vote for a special tax deduction for special companies because that's the only chance you get, because you create a new constituency of people who now won't allow that tax reform to go through. And it's that cronyism. These bills, I'm not picking so much on Little on Barbara because she was a sponsor, but they were unanimous going through. This is the normal thing in Richmond, these special deals for special people. And there was no Reagan to stand up and say, stop. There was nobody to say, hey, have you read Hayek? I mean, we have to realize the long-term implications of what we do. And if you start making special deals for special people, some of the same donors that Bob complains about Barbara having, like one who has $250 million invested in Barbara's district in a data center. It's a great business, but they don't deserve any more special help than anybody else. The machine shop owners, the flower shop owners, or the pizza shop owners. And by playing that game, you go right into that process, and then they're lobbying against having tax reform because now they got 0%. Why would they be happy if everybody else is?
May I respond?
Yeah, and since Bob was picked on a little bit here. I'm just kidding. Get a minute to respond.
Number one, Ronald Reagan did support a gas tax increase. I would remind you of that. Number two, I don't work for the mortgage electronic registration system, which is a private system created by the banks to avoid the accountability that we have with clerks for tracking all of the ownership of housing in the United States. The Supreme Court of Massachusetts severely criticized two of the banks who fund your organization were losing track completely of what is going on with who owns what property. Now, I'm telling you, when you only have one thing in front of you, you have to make a decision. This is the earth, not the New Jerusalem. If there is a tax credit, it doesn't go for a specific company, it goes for a class of people. If that's all you have, I'm going to vote for taxes, because in 23 years, I have never voted for one tax increase.
This is why. So we got Bob Marshall and the Supreme Court of Massachusetts against Stephen Hollingshead and Ronald Reagan. This is a very important issue, right? I mean, you don't even know the economic effects of the things that you voted for. Now, I understand that you didn't know, right? But we need somebody who can say cronyism is wrong in all its forms. You've got to push for lowering the rate for everybody, broadening the base, and saying, just like Reagan said, 1986, his crowning domestic achievement was to get everybody together and say, all you special people have to give up your special deals, and we are going to lower the rate for everybody. And what happened? What happened was the economy boomed. We've been trying it